Hello, and welcome to The Storied Human. I'm Lynn Thompson, and today I have the pleasure of interviewing a friend, Patty Martin. She and I were in a podcasting course together, and we stuck it out with another friend. We do something called a Pod Squad meeting every week. I've gotten to know her pretty well. I've had so much fun learning about the two of them and what they do, and it sort of kept me on course, I have to say. I'm not sure I would have stuck with it in the same way without them. So Patty's pretty cool. She runs a podcast called the Disobedient Scientist podcast, which is so fun to listen to. I definitely recommend it. And since 2020, she's ventured out and has her own business. She's a bit of a climate coach. She identifies as an artist and a disruptor. And she's definitely an entrepreneur helping people understand how they can make sustainable changes. She uses her scientific background and her creativity to help small businesses do that, to understand how it comes down to their level, what they can do at their level. I really love how she makes all of this big stuff personal. And I love what I've learned from her so far. And I'm hoping that we learn more as we find out what she's about and how we can make a difference. I really love that you're involved in that, Patty. I really admire you. So welcome, Patty.
Oh, thank you, Lynn, so much for having me. I think I'm going to have to steal your intro of me because it was so flattering, and I love the way you framed some of it, what I do. I hadn't thought of it in the way you just said. But I'm so honored to be here and to that you wanted to have me on your show.
Patty, I woke up excited this morning. I was like, today's Patty's interview. I was just like, you have you're doing a lot of cool work, and I love hearing about it. And I think sharing it with people is like, a public service announcement almost. I really do.
Yes. I just heard I read a line the other day that someone said that speaking, like public speaking, isn't about attention, it's a public service. And I think that goes so in line with this. The more we speak about it, I think the bigger it becomes in our lives.
I think that's so important. I think having a podcast is like a public service. I really do. And I love that broadcasting has become so, so accessible for people. Like that's my biggest shock was how quickly you can have your own little broadcast called podcasting. Like we can just start getting our message out there. So what kinds of I would love to hear how you started, like, a little bit about your background, what you think is relevant.
Yeah.
Big question. I know. Big question.
I know. It's always hard to distill this down, so it's not
is.
like a 45-minute answer.
You don't have to. I like the 45 minute.
Well, so I think like a lot of people in this space, I wasn't always in it. I grew up very much connected to nature. My parents grew up in Northern California, actually on the ancestral lands of the Wailaki. And I currently run my business on the lands of the Northern Pomo, just to give some acknowledgement there. But I grew up, like, my parents were hippies. We were very much like back to the landers. I lived in a tent for 7 years. I very much was connected to nature. And I think because of a lot of different reasons, and just being young and rebellious, I pretty much dismissed everything I was given as a child. Oh. And so my goal was I wanted to be a lawyer, and then I wanted to be a doctor. And somewhere in there, I ended up on scientist, and I went into biomedical research. And I did that for the first 30 years of my life. And when there was just a point when I was getting my PhD that I realized I was very, very lost and disconnected to myself. I didn't know who I was. I had no idea what my purpose was. It was a very painful place. And I think that was the turning point for me in coming into being an entrepreneur and really trying to work in the climate solution space.
And that fit you. You realized that fit you much better.
Yeah, I think it was actually a gradual fit. It still is a gradual fit. I don't know if I will ever fully know who it is I am. And
Right.
I've stopped trying to really find that. But
It's a journey. I think it's an ongoing. I think that's so
right.
honest and cool that you say that because, and I think some young people are surprised when I still say I'm trying to find out who I am, but I think we just are ever evolving and we add, we accrete information and things look differently through those filters. We just keep going. And I love that you acknowledge that and that that's one thing I love when I talk to you is how open you are and how you take people's ideas and really like percolate them.
Mm,
And I think that's the secret to being sort of inspiring to others is you inspire them to be that way. That's just my take. I really think that's a great way to look at things. What I'm so impressed, like you were raised with those cycles of nature in a way that most of us don't connect with. So
yeah.
it's almost like you came back to that a little bit. You reconnected.
Yes, I feel really privileged in that I have been able to really reconnect. That it hasn't. I think there's different journeys for different people, but in some ways, I think I always knew what it felt like to be in alignment and fully authentic with myself. If I have to describe my early childhood, that would be how I would describe it is I was in alignment, I was authentic, I was in flow. And, somewhere with trauma and life experiences and all of that, right? Like you get out of whack, I 100% began to dissociate and disconnect from myself because of just life experiences. And so coming back to that, like I always had that North Star to really come back to what that
Yeah.
feeling felt like for me.
That's very powerful for me. And also just the healing nature of being that close to the earth and the cycles of, just you lived it in that
Yeah.
tent. You were a lot of us are raised disconnected from that. At least people my age. I wasn't because my father was a woodsman. It was like he was just obsessed. So I feel so lucky because that was injected into my childhood and we lived it. Yeah, we were taught all kinds of things and about the cycles of nature. And my father, when he finally could, I think I was like 11 when we finally had room and the wherewithal to get a horse, like that was his
Mm,
thing. And just we were surrounded by animals, and I feel so lucky that we were raised in that way because
yeah.
that's like my North Star, definitely. Like I've come back to that in a big way.
Yeah.
And just that healing of looking at the trees and being in the forest. And I don't think a lot of people were raised that way.
No, I don't think so either. But I also think it's not inaccessible either,
No, I think
right?
once people get a taste of it, I see it all over the internet now. It's so
Yeah.
wonderful to see people, getting a taste of it. Like I sit outside, I love the trees, I go
Right.
to the beach. And just what I really like is seeing the science-backed um explanation of why these things make you feel good. There's ions in sea air and there's wonderful stress relieving properties of being around trees. And so people, even skeptical people or people that didn't connect with nature, they can be assured that there's data behind it.
Yeah. There is actually some really fascinating data behind different ways we connect with nature and how it triggers all of our feel good hormones. One study I was just learning about was around this process called forest bathing,
Yes.
where you like go barefoot and you walk very, very slowly through
Mm.
um, a just like a natural landscape. And there's all this psychology around how it it changes the way we feel, it changes the way we function, it changes people's actual physiology and their posture. Like there's all these benefits of walking barefoot that is science based, and
That's so cool.
yeah. But I also like I think to get back, well, 2 points, right? Like I think that it's so easy, and this is what I really coach a lot of people on is connecting with nature is so easy. You don't have to do it. Like, and anyone who has gone and seen the ocean or stood under a redwood tree or whatever it is, right? Like there's so much majesty in nature that it's very easy to see how it's not the scientific thing that we're experiencing. It's a spiritual thing. It's a way we connect with our spirit and ourselves. And I think that's a universal feeling that all of us can know if you've experienced it before or not. It's right there at our fingertips. It allows us to really ground and connect the second you put yourself out there. And so I want to say it's super easy to go and do. It's probably one of the easiest ways to find yourself. It was the easiest way I found myself, was just going on nature walks. But also, like we also don't need, as much as I love science, right? Like I think there's so much beauty in the mystery and magic of things we can't explain and understand.
Mm.
And, if it feels good, it feels good, right? We don't have to know that dopamine's flowing or,
Right.
serotonin or like whatever it is, right? Like like if it works, it works, right?
Right.
Like who
That's a good
cares if
point.
we've explained it or not already through a
I
different
just think you
mechanism?
win over some of the, the hardcore disconnected people that way. Give it a try. It'll increase your dopamine. But you're right. It's right there.
Yeah, like interesting question though. Like I have a lot of theories as a scientist who has been in two different spaces. So I've been in the biomedical space. I have a PhD in infection and disease and immunology. And so I've had experience talking to people about diseases, and I've had experience talking to people about climate change. And the people who have the most resistance, science doesn't win them over. Like I want so
That's a
badly
really good point. Oh my gosh.
for it to be true, right? Like because I have the science. I can sit here and show you and explain to you in detail what, people's life's work that show that this is the case. But the truth is science isn't a motivator for change. It's what you're doing, Lynn, right? It's the storytelling and the human connection that actually gets people to change. It's like it's the story you heard from the dude at the barbecue in 2012 that you still remember to this day, that pops into your head, right? Around, something to do with like nature or whatever, right? Like that's how our brains work, is we connect with humans and stories, and that's what changes us.
That is very powerful. That's how you learn the best.
Yeah.
That's how you learn the best, is when it's couched in a story.
Yeah.
So you've expanded that and made it sort of your life's journey right now,
Yeah.
to connect people in a more personal way,
Mm-hmm.
that they are connected personally to climate change, that they can connect, that they can not just learn the science, but understand personally how they're connected and related.
Yeah.
That intrigues me a lot.
Yeah, like I think that's my goal, is for, if I could wave my magic wand, that's what I want people to do, is go from this place of disconnection to, reconnection. Like when I think about climate change, there's three really big problems, I think, that umbrella this whole scenario that we're facing as a species, as a world, right? It's that we have a rapid and uncontrolled release of emissions caused by the burning of fossil fuels that has changed our world to the point where we can't put the cat back in the bag. We are now being forced to adapt. We have to adapt in order to survive. The species that can are going to survive. The ones that cannot will not. That is our reality. And the third problem is that we have to change our behavior in order to adapt as humans. And what gives me a lot of hope is the science is there. Between the science and indigenous knowledge, we can solve our emissions problems and our adaptation problems, right? Like we have it, like that's in the bag. Like we no longer, we need scientists and entrepreneurs and people to develop, but we no longer really need like extensive revolutionary science to solve this problem. We need people to come along with the solutions already there.
Oh, that's
And
good. Yeah, I like that.
yeah, and so that's what I'm really trying to focus on is how do we get people to come along and change, especially when change is so scary. And we're looking at a future that we don't have any understanding of what it's going to look like, right? How do we get there? And, you know, when I talk about disconnection, that's the I think the root problem that I see in this. It comes up in other ways though, right? Like I think that there's a lot of overwhelm when we talk about climate solutions. There's a lot of disempowerment. It's very easy to say, okay, what do I do? And then get into a place of like, I have no, like, how am I going to change, Amazon's practices
It's too
or
big, right?
yeah, it's so big and you feel so small. It's very disempowering, the ways in which we talk about this. It's scary. There's a lot of anxiety and all of those things. There's a lot of shame. We use a lot of shame language when we talk about climate change and our behavior in it. And all of those things lead us, like what we know on the short term is like fear and shame can cause immediate reaction, right? Like we use them evolutionarily to like, we see a bear charging at us, we freaking run away from the bear, right? Like that's what fear does to us, right? Like we see someone who's doing something, a behavior we really don't want, we use shame to stop it right then and there. Over long periods of time, months, years, decades, 170 years since we first learned about what the climate science around this, what that does is we no longer are responding to that. We have shut down and turned off because over long periods of time we can't always be running away from the bear over 10 years, right? And so that's really why we're so disconnected, is that there's no ability to sustain the feelings that we have around this. And so that's really what I've tried to work on, is how do we reframe
Yeah,
this and empower ourselves.
I love that. And I love how you root it in, human psychological responses, because you can't live like that. So you burn out or you just disconnect.
Yep.
That's a very
That's
important part of what you've identified, is how to help people through that. Because people
Yeah,
do care. Like I always say, if you make it, this is my big thing, if you make it easy, and I say this all the time, if you make it easy for someone to do the right thing, and I don't mean baby them, but make it easy, clear the path, they will do it. They will do it. 90% of the people will do the right thing.
absolutely. Like, I mean, the new stats out there polling shows that 9 out of 10 people believe that the climate is changing in the world, right? And most of them care to some extent
Mm-hmm.
about what that's going to do for us as a species. But 75% of people don't know what to do about it, right? Nobody knows what to do.
That's scary, right? Yeah.
And when you don't know what to do, okay, then I'm just going to continue on doing what it is I've always been doing. I do think that, and this is the place I try to really lead by example. And it's a complicated place, like, and I recognize why people don't do it. I agree with you. I think I think that we all have feelings of wanting to do more and caring more about what this is. It's very overwhelming. There's all these disconnection factors that lead to us not. And I've been there, right? Like I was when I was in New York, before I decided, actually, one of the reasons why I completely pivoted my career into this space, it was towards the end of my PhD. I had just actually gotten permission to defend my thesis. I was like riding this high. And I was in an elevator in Midtown Manhattan, and it was very fancy. They had like news, a TV on the wall that was playing the news, right? In the elevator, and I'm there with like 20 other people, and it's quiet, and we're going down like 16 floors, and it was talking about these fires that were happening in Australia and how like 2,000 species had just been eliminated overnight, including like over 90% of the koala population in Australia.
Oh my.
And I'm sitting there. It was like this great moment in my career and in my life. And I'm thinking about where I'm going, in this next chapter. And I had this thought of like, why aren't people thinking about this? Why aren't we doing more? Somebody needs to
Wow.
be doing more.
Wow.
And but it wasn't me, right?
It was
And
somebody.
literally,
Yeah.
yeah, it was like, okay, I'm here trying to solve disease. It's somebody else's responsibility to be solving this climate crisis. And like something about that thought really stuck with me. And like I like over months and months, I was like, wait, that's what everybody's saying, right? Is that we're all busy working hard, solving our problems in our life, and it's somebody else's problem to be solving this. And I finally realized, like, no, like this has to be me,
I love
right?
that.
It has to be all of us. Like we have to, like, that's the scary and hard part, is saying, okay, I don't know the answers to this or the solutions. It's going to be messy. I'm going to be wrong, but let's start. Let's get going, right? Like, let's be wrong and then pivot from there, because
Yeah. Yeah.
right now that inaction, that's the wrong
That's
response, is
killing
the
us.
inaction, right?
Yeah. So I think you see it so clearly, and I see great potential for what you're doing. You can bring it down to size for people, you can educate people, and you can set them on the path. Like, here, there is something you can do.
Yep.
There is a way you can live.
Yep.
And to me, that's again a huge public service. It really is, because we're all kind of like doing a little bit. We don't know if we're doing
Yeah.
enough. It seems too big. It definitely seems too big.
Yeah.
And I come from a little bit different. I mean, my husband's like way ahead of the curve. Like, he was
Mm.
concerned in the 80s. He was like minoring in environmental science. He was like recycling when I met him. It was really weird. People were like, "You're what?" And I'm like, "Yeah, we recycle." And we had those weird light bulbs. And now I'm just so grateful to him, because he put us on that path. And I was pretty out of it. But it just seemed normal to me by the time people were starting to bitch about it. But it's not enough, to just do those things. And you have to change your whole, like, my friends ran big green fests for several years, and I helped them with those. And they always said people forget the first couple, it's reduce, reuse, recycle. It's not just recycle, it's like,
Yeah.
and reduce, reuse implies a different, like we talked before I started recording about you going to thrift shops, and I like that too. And when the kids were little, especially to save money, and to just the idea that these clothes are perfectly good or this furniture is perfectly good, you change your lifestyle. Like, those two things, the reduce, reuse, it's more of a lifestyle change.
It is. And there's two. I actually have. I don't know. I know where I stand on this personally, but also where I talk to other people about this, because I think it's very hard to make people make lifestyle
It's
changes,
huge. Yeah.
especially when we're talking about taking away something
Oh,
like
yeah. Oh, yeah.
like that's really difficult. And so it's not where I start. Like, there
Good.
are a lot of things to do, and I don't start with making the reduce side of things, right? Like,
That's
that's
probably
not,
better than what, yeah, that's probably better. Yeah.
well, and it's, but because it's so much, I think, of the dialogue around climate solutions that we can do has been that, like,
Yeah.
I think about my whole life. I've, like, my mom, like, we never had a dryer in my life, right? Like, and it was
Wow.
always like, why we can't have this, because it's burning fossil fuels and leading to our planet warming. And like, I was told that as a kid, but the second I went out and got like my own apartment, right? I went and I got a dryer, right? Because it's so convenient,
It is. It
and it
is.
makes your clothes soft, and it's all of these things. And I have now
Yeah.
since gone back to not using it. But like, we don't want to get rid of the stuff that makes our lives convenient and easy. And so that's, I would say, there's two things that I would recommend starting with. that are impactful. And one is talking. It is probably the most important thing you can do regarding the climate, is talking about climate change, and specifically in an unshaming, non-negative way. Because, and I do recognize that that's pretty hard to do, because so much of what we've been taught through the media and through just dialogue that we hear around climate change and climate science and solutions is negative and shaming. But we need to get everybody on board. That is, and thinking about solutions in different ways. And so that's the one thing I recommend. It's not to recycle, because 96% of recycling actually ends up in landfills anyway right now.
I heard that. That's terrible.
It's definitely a really high number. I don't know if it's actually 96. I want to say it is, but it's high.
But it's high. Yeah. So how do you recommend talking about it with people?
Yeah. I recommend you go and find an inspiring story and talk to people about that, right? Like, and so how I started in this space is I got on like a climate tech newsletter that would show all these jobs and from all these startup companies that were happening. And then I would like read about the startups, and I found so much inspiration about people and the solutions they're coming up with.
Oh, that's so cool.
And so like here, I'll give you a few examples.
Good.
There is a company out there that is they're now selling agricultural food. So like food that you feed cows, but they figured out that if you give cows seaweed, feed them seaweed, they produce 80% less methane just by changing, I think, the microbiome in their guts, right? And so now there's a company out there doing that.
I love that.
There's a company out there that has figured a way to plant coral at 60 times the rate that most other people can do right now.
That's amazing.
And you can actually go and adopt a coral as well. And that makes a really great present if you have like a kid or going into the holidays. That's going to be one of my things that I'm going to give to people is I'm going to adopt corals for them.
I love that. Could we put that in my show notes? Could you give me the info about that?
I will
That's
definitely.
adorable.
Yeah.
We've had a few local companies that inspired me. One is I forget the name. They're very close by, where they'll come and clear your lumber and they'll build something for you from it. So they'll just sort of, if you have a tree that you need to get rid of, or you're afraid it's dead, they'll clear it for you and they'll build something for you, like furniture or a deck, so that you have your own wood removed from your own. I just love that, like thinking like more locally and how to do that. And oh my gosh, adopt a coral. Most kids would adore that as a present.
Yeah.
There was something on CBS Sunday Morning about people, I think it was CBS Sunday, or maybe it was 60 Minutes, about speeding up the growth of coral, about, building coral fields and really addressing that so that we don't have that inevitable decline. But I think hearing people's creative solutions is the best way to inspire us. Yeah, I think you're right.
That's right. And it's something that you can, like, anytime I'm at a gas station or at a coffee shop, I try to like just be like in line as I'm waiting. I talk with a lot of people, but that's so that's my goal, is to just tell somebody something that gets them thinking in a different way that maybe they'll go and look up, right? Or, think about like I always use that adopt the coral example, because then they can go and think about it for their kids or whatever it is. And, there's solutions out there. Like, for example, there's a company right now that it creates, instead of like paper disposable coffee cups, they go and they have like a system where you can get like ceramic cups at coffee shops to go. And then you just have drop off locations at other coffee shops. Like, it's like this whole process. Like, when I'm at a coffee shop, I tell the clerk when I'm checking out, like, hey, did you know you can do this? And somewhere in there, people remember, and it might not be in that second, but it comes up later. And
I love that.
it's bringing in these solutions, or I talk about composting all the time because our food waste is probably one of the important things we need to be reducing.
Yeah.
Like things like that we can slowly just build on, and that's what we need. And that's what, it's not recycling, it's not using less of the plastic straws. Like if you do it, great, but I don't want people to tap out. Like the
Right, right.
problem with the solutions that are out there right now is we only have a certain capacity. We have like 2 or 3 solutions currently right now that we will just do, and then everything else is either beyond our budget as humans or like beyond our time that we can allocate to it. And so if you're going to be spending time doing something, I don't want it to be something that isn't impactful. I want you to be going after the most impactful things and talking with people about it, and continually to talk about it, most impactful thing.
And I love that too, because you just should talk to people more anyway. You should relate to people and have your social network and get around and really share.
Yep.
I also thought about like little things I see popping up, like you can rent dresses, and you can rent formal wear, and you can rent clothes. Like that never used to exist. I mean, except for tuxes. I don't remember that. And I thought, that's anything that doesn't make you make new, fire up machines and burn fuel and make new clothes is great. So there's like a lot of little solutions that I see sort of seeping into the everyday that are fantastic.
That's correct. There, and like this recyclable fashion it's a really fun area too, right? Like you get some really cool things. And also just like, you know, like I do a lot of, I actually have been starting to learn how to sew my own clothes, not because I want to make everything from scratch, but like the clothes that I do find that I love, I can add my own little flavor to it. Has been really fun. That's the artist in
I
me. But
love
there's
that
some,
you do that. Yeah,
yeah,
I just bought a sewing machine. I want to get back to sewing, even if
yeah,
it's just pillows or like
yeah,
there's these pajamas I love. And I'm like, I was looking at them one day and I'm like, I can make this. I used to sew elastic waistbands, or I used to sew soft, shirts with like a crew neck collar. It's not a big deal.
yeah,
And
yeah,
it's very, you can be creative then. You can add your own touches, and people can say, "Oh, I like that. Where'd you get it?" And you could say, "I made it," which is
yeah.
another great way to sort of inspire people. Like, I made this,
That's
remember?
right.
Remember? Like, I
That's
had
right.
home ec class, and my mother also taught me to sew.
Yeah.
So why did I give that up? It's very fulfilling, and it's also kind of cool and cheaper. Well, it can be not cheaper, but anyway.
It can't, but very satisfying to make your own
I
thing,
think so.
you
I
know.
think so. In the way that baking is and cooking is, I really
Mm-hmm.
love that same feeling.
That's
And
right.
I was going to say, I'm really proud in our house. I think there's like 2 pieces of furniture that are new, maybe
Mm.
3.
Yeah, especially there's a huge used and loved furniture. Like you can find some really great pieces. You definitely don't have to buy
And a
that
lot of
kind
them
of stuff
we
used.
didn't pay for. They were passed down from the family, which
Mm-hmm.
I know a lot of people don't. I don't know. I just love old furniture. So anyway, but
Yeah.
that's all those things help. Like living
Yeah.
that way
Yeah.
helps and
It
makes you,
does.
especially the sewing and baking and things make you feel better, like to have an
It
outlet
does.
like that. So you said you talk about climate. Was there a second thing?
Yeah. Well, maybe there's 2 more things.
Okay.
The thing, one of the things that I would just plug is in the next 6 to 9 months, there are going to be, depending on your household income and whether you rent or buy, there's going to be around $20,000 in incentives and grants to start upgrading your house, coming from the Inflation Reduction Act. And so that's definitely something I'll put, maybe this is also a link in the show notes,
Oh, great.
that I can drop, but there's a really great calculator that shows homeowners and renters what they can go and buy, where they can get the money from, and how much it's going to be for like heat pumps and like upgrading your materials. So like getting double paned windows, getting solar, those types of things. That's going to be coming
Fantastic.
down. Yeah. And it's going to be much cheaper than it's ever been. So
That And that fits my whole thing. Like, just make it a little easier. People will do the right things. They will do
Yeah.
it. Incentivize.
And you'll save money. Like a lot of these things, even if you have to take a loan out, which they're developing like low interest loans for some of these things, you'll have paid it off in the time, like in a year's time. Like that's the whole idea, is that like the amount of money that would have gone into it from like electricity or like different fuel costs get paid off for these as well.
I was talking to a couple people in a political group I'm in, and the one woman, I don't know how long they've had solar, but they sell back, so that's really cool.
Yeah.
And they pay $3.75 a month.
Yep. It's pretty amazing.
Pretty amazing is right.
And when you can have your heating hooked up to that and your transportation, that becomes even more amazing.
Yeah. Talk about off the grid.
Yeah, like you become very definitely the expenses you see currently right now go down with that. You have to invest in infrastructure, but including like the home charging stations, if you have, all you have to do is plug it into your wall for like a electric vehicle, but you have to purchase the electric vehicle.
Yeah, but it's great. That's super.
There's going to be so many options. You just have to then it's just up to you to go after them, but they're there. Yeah. They're already there actually. So
yeah, that's a wonderful point. Somebody was just talking to me. Their husband sells solar, and he was talking to me about the great deals. Like, I mean, they really want you to move towards that.
Yeah. And right now, like it depends on what state you're in, but most states, it's not, you want to go to your like electricity provider, that's where you'll get the loans from. And they'll match, give you like a 50% discount. And then you have to like do a match type thing with them. But that's where I would go, is your electricity provider, or any type of energy provider. Like there's some energy trusts in different states and that kind of thing, but go to the local providers, and they've received the grants from the feds. And they're just distributing it out. And they should also have funding for like appliance upgrades and that kind of stuff as well.
Yeah, so that's so good.
Yeah.
So the net result is you're just a lot more efficient, you're saving some money, and you're helping the climate.
Yep. It's so lovely when that happens.
When all three things come together. I know.
Yeah.
And was there a third thing?
Yeah, I think it's just I've been playing around with this idea a lot recently. I had some discussions, and it's such a wonderful thought. And it's a reframe about how we function in life. And it's about really trying to bring consent into every action you do in the world. And, a lot of times we think about consent in terms of men and women and sexual dynamics, but really it's just about making sure you have permission to do whatever action it is you do. And the more I've thought about it, the bigger and bigger it gets, because, I think about like, do I have consent to I don't know, leave this here, build this house here? Are all the animals living in this space, are they going to be willing to share this with me? It builds on it. Does, the more you think about, do you have consent for the actions that you take? And so
I love this. Yeah. We were just talking about mining and the old ways that people would just open up a hole in the earth and take these, things that are finite, things that can't be replaced. Just that idea. I mean, they were raping the earth, literally. There was not consent. The earth didn't consent to that. And humanity doesn't want you to be doing that. And so I'm glad that we're getting away from that. But I love that you make it bigger and more personal too.
Yeah.
Like my own life. Like, what am I doing?
Yeah.
More conscious, just living in a more conscious way of your impact.
That's right. It brings a lot of mindfulness to, it's so easy when all you have to do is go to the store and buy something and take it home, right? Like we're so removed from the processes that are going on behind the scenes there. And so it just, the more we become critical of those processes, the more power we have, because you can then question those companies and say, even if you still, every time I buy from like Amazon, right? I always, you know how they send the follow up, like rate your experience form. I
Yeah.
always sit there and say, I really hope you are like, hey, Amazon, thanks for the product. I really hope you're thinking about like making like deliveries more environmentally friendly and reducing emissions to zero. Right. And so, and that happens all the time with all companies. So like, that's another great action. You know, if there's any time to give feedback, always bring up
Put
climate
that
in
out
your
there.
feed.
Yeah.
Yep. Put it out.
If
That's
enough
just part
people
of that
do,
conversation. Right.
right. And that's how
Yeah.
change happens. People forget that. If enough voices are raised, companies say, oh, I better listen to these people, you know?
Yep. And it's actually a really small percentage of voices too. Like you
Oh,
like
I love that. Yeah.
especially with companies, right? Like like even less than 1%. It just takes a few people in 1 week to have said the same thing. And then all of a sudden everyone's thinking like, oh my God, all of our clients are thinking this. We have
Yeah.
to change or,
But I mean,
that's the
those
stuff.
voices, there probably are tons of people behind those
That's right.
comments, right? That
There
don't
are.
make the comment.
That's
So
right.
it's probably a great response. That's a very good point, too.
Yeah.
Just don't miss your opportunity to say something.
No.
So tell me more about this idea of consent and how you thought about that, because I'm sort of fascinated.
Yeah. I think that well, these are all thought experiments right now. We don't live in a world of consent, unfortunately, right? Like, but I think what gives me hope and what I wish to aspire to is what would that world look like?
Yeah.
And so many of these super complicated problems that we're like trying to figure out and unravel and wrestle with, right? They disappear if we just lived by consent, right? Like our action based consent. And so I think that's where I think that this is really a magical space. This isn't my like there are people out in the world who have written about this. There's a book called hold on, let me look this up that I've just been reading that was just talking about it. Oh, The Future Earth, which is a really phenomenal book. It's by Kyle White. And he talked about this a little bit there as well. But just, so much of what the root problem of all of this is it's really easy to go here. And I try always not to because it triggers people. But this function of colonialism and
Right.
manifest destiny and
That's what we're
that
talking about.
we
Yep.
can go and just like take the land and claim it as ours or take something that isn't and say it's ours and then just use it until it's dead and then move on to the next, right? That's really the those actions have caught up
That's
with
the
us now.
underpinning. Yeah.
That's the problem. And
And
so
that's the
that's
old
really what we
earth.
have to
Yeah. That's the old way and the old earth. And
yeah.
I think you're so smart not to emphasize that. But yeah, that's what we're trying to move away from
Yeah.
and
It
get into a different
is.
headspace. I love the reframing and I love the idea of thinking that's such um, a, a great way to get to the heart of your actions is there consent?
Yeah.
Do I have consent? I
Yeah.
love that. I just think it's a great reframing and it's so ethical. It's such a great way to approach any situation.
Yeah.
It's
You'll
so
live
funny
an
because
ethical life that way,
I
right?
know a fully ethical life. We were just talking about that this morning. We were talking about mining and how people took whatever they wanted. And yeah, it's like that's the old world, and
Yeah.
it's still that way in some parts of the world, but I feel the consciousness shifting. I feel people wanting to do something different. It's just, you're up against these huge companies doing the wrong thing.
Yeah.
But we can change that. I hear that in what you're saying. We can change it. We can be instruments of change. We are not powerless. Gotta
That's
open our
right.
mouths, yeah, and do
That's
the
right.
kinds of things you're suggesting. And I
That's
want
right.
to put that book in the show notes.
Yeah.
Future Earth. Good.
Yeah.
So is there anything you'd like to leave us with? Because I love this whole conversation. I think it's so helpful to hear your thoughts about this. I already feel like I'm going to approach things a little differently. Is there anything else
Mhm.
that we haven't said?
Yeah, I think maybe what I would the the idea I'd leave everybody with is this idea that the fighter keeps dreaming. And as long as there are humans on this planet, there's hope for what we can do with it. Our reality, it's not going to be a gentle reality. It's going to be painful for a lot of people. It's unjust and how it's going to go down. But as long as we're here, there's hope. And I think there's so much power and potential in how we dream about how we want to go forward. And we don't spend enough time dreaming about the relationship we want to have with the earth, the world we want to live in that does represent equality and justice, that brings balance back to this incredibly imbalanced space. And I think that would be my last call to action for people is to dream with love about the future you want to live in, because that's the first step, is to find that dream and then slowly start working your way towards it. That's how we go towards it, to acknowledge our present and have compassion for it, love for it, but to always keep, that brighter northern star in line, because it's the only way we get there through this.
I do feel a lot of hope talking to you. I love how you break it down. It's really helpful, I think. I think you're doing good
Yeah.
work. Some people would
Thanks.
say God's work.
Yeah. Well, it's a spiritual,
It
I
is.
didn't.
There's a component of it that's spiritual for sure.
Yeah. I've never actually understood my spirituality until I started talking about our connection to the earth. And then all of a sudden it appeared for me. So, like
Yeah.
there's,
No, she's
it is soul
definitely
work.
alive. She's
Yeah,
alive.
she is.
And you connect with her and it's wonderful.
Yeah.
Absolutely wonderful. And part of what I see too, and I love this, these simple things like people sharing. What I love about the internet is people share things at places you might never go, animals you might never know. And so you want to protect that. Over time, you see these beautiful, special animals and places. You start to remember like this is a special place to be loved and protected. And I think that's such a great function of connecting on the internet, and especially for young people to see the variety of species and the beauty in the oceans. And like I'm on Instagram watching videos of whales every day. I just
Yeah.
think it's so good for my head. But I
Yeah.
also think people will remember there's such beauty to preserve. There's such a reason to love
That's
our
right.
planet. It's just so beautiful and full of wonder.
Yeah. Like, how would we live our lives if we shifted our focus on to what we love rather than what we're reacting to,
What we're afraid
right?
of. Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
Like it's just like doesn't change our reality, but it changes the energy in which we live.
It's so
And
true. It's so
that's
well, it's
that's how
like
we get
that
empowered.
that little book, like that little book that I did an episode on, Love is Letting Go of Fear. You can't feel fear and love at the same time.
Yeah.
So if you start to choose love, it's it's a kind of volcanic, you know, in your life. It really is.
Yeah.
Well, I've always liked you. Now I know more about what you do. And I can't thank you enough for sharing with us because I know people are going to get it. They're going to hear a different way of looking at things. And I love the hope that you have. And I love you, Patty Martin.
Oh, I love you too, Lynn. Thank you
Thank you
so
so
much for
much.
having me and
It was the
giving me a
best.
platform to talk to people about this.
It's important.